1518, there's a man named Galatinus. He's actually a Catholic. He's the confessor of the Pope. And he says, well, how do we pronounce this name? Right? If it has the vowels of Adonai, how do we pronounce it? And he says, well, if you pronounce the vowels the way that it's written, it would be Yehovah. But the Jews say those are the vowels of Adonai. And as far as we know, he's the first Christian to explicitly say that if you take the vowels the way they're written in the Hebrew text, the name is pronounced Yehovah. No Jewish rabbi ever revealed how to pronounce the name. We only know it from the manuscripts of the Bible. I taught that.
Okay.
The rabbis did know, and how do I know they knew? Because in the Talmud, when it says you're not allowed to speak the name, it also says that rabbis would teach the name to their disciples once every 7 years.
So they knew it, but they were not saying it.
They were saying it in secret once every 7 years as part of some ceremony of transmitting the name so the knowledge wouldn't be lost.
Yeah.
Now, where do we get Yahweh? Ooh, that's interesting.
Welcome back to another episode of the Covenant and Conflict podcast. With us again, Nehemia Gordon. We're so glad you're here.
Thank you. Shalom. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for coming back. I know we joked that we might have been wearing the same things the last time we filmed, but this is not the same day. That we're not pulling a wool over your eyes. This is a new day. And when you came last time, I said, I think before we were recording, I said, I really want you to come back and speak on the name of the Lord. And you said it's one of my favorite topics.
It is my favorite topic, probably. Definitely one of my top 3.
And so now we have the time, because I wanted people to get to know you. We talked about you being a Karaite and what that means. We talked about the Hebrew Yeshua versus the Greek Jesus, the Hebrew Matthew. But now we have some time allotted to talk about the name of God. It's a pretty big deal, right?
It's a really important deal. So in the Hebrew Bible, what Christians call the Old Testament, we have the name of God appears 6,827 times.
Wow.
And what I mean by the name of God, in Hebrew, it's the 4 letters, Yud, He, Vav, He.
Yeah.
What some people call the tetragrammaton, or literally the 4-letter name.
Yeah.
And just to contrast there, the word God, which in Hebrew is Elohim, is another word for God, El. And there's another term, Adonai, which is Lord. And then there's like El Shaddai, which is usually translated God Almighty. If you take all those titles are titles, take them all together, they don't amount to the number of times that his actual name appears.
Wow.
And that's kind of mind-blowing that his name appears, the name Yud He Vav He appears probably at least twice as many times as all of the other titles combined.
Yeah.
And what's so powerful for me as a Jew about that name is that, first of all, when Moses says to God, he's like, okay, I'm going to go to the people and say, God has sent me. What name should I tell them? That's in Exodus 3. And he first answers.
Does he say what name, or does he say, who should I say sent me?
You're getting me on the spot.
Okay, I was just like, maybe I've never read it that way. But essentially he's saying, who do I say you are?
And here's the context. They're living in Egypt for hundreds of years.
Yeah.
And there's thousands of gods.
Yeah.
Right? So which God in particular is sending me? The God of, which one?
Yeah.
And God responds, first of all, Ehyeh asher ehyeh, which is usually translated, I am that I am. We can get back to that.
Yeah.
That's in Exodus 3:14. And then in verse 15, he says his actual name, Yud He Vav He, which we'll talk about how that's pronounced.
Yeah.
And he says, this is my name forever. And then in many translations, it has, this is my memorial for generation to generation. But that word memorial, the Hebrew word zichri, actually is from a root that means to mention. So it means this is my name forever. This is my mention for generation to generation. When you mention me, when you call upon me in prayer and in oaths, this is the name you are to use.
Yeah.
And so that it was clearly from the very beginning intended to use that name. Now what happened over the centuries is Jewish tradition stepped in, and there became this tradition that God's name is too holy to speak. And so instead of calling on the actual name, Jews started using these replacements, these titles, right? So like the title Adonai, which means Lord. Adonai appears in the Hebrew Bible.
Yeah.
But it also it appears approximately 400 times, 434, give or take, versus 6,827 for the actual name Yud He Vav He.
Yeah.
So the intention was that we would call on his name. In fact, there's this beautiful report we have in the Mishnah, which is the writings of the ancient rabbis, where they talk about how there was a practice of ancient Israel to greet people in the name. And what does that mean, to greet them in the name? So they explain, look at what happened when Gideon encounters the angel. The angel says to him, Yehovah, that's the letters Yud He Vav He, according to the pronunciation I understand. We'll talk more about that later.
Yeah.
He greets him in the name of Yehovah, and he says, Yehovah be with you. And Gideon doesn't understand what that means. He thinks that's just, hey, how you doing? But what the angel really meant was, no, Yehovah is going to be with you and you're going to be powerful. And then they bring another example, which is in Ruth, where Boaz is walking on the road to Bethlehem and he sees the harvesters in the field. And they say to him, Yevarechecha Yehovah, may Yehovah bless you. And he says to them, Yehovah imachem, Yehovah be with you. Right, so that was the greeting of ancient Israel. People would greet each other in the name. And so somehow we went from greeting each other in the name to where we can't even say the name in Jewish tradition. Unless we are the high priest in the temple, is what Maimonides says. And then there's this statement in the Talmud that says, well, in this world, in this fallen world, in the current state, we can't say the name, but in the world to come, and by the world to come, they don't mean heaven. They mean when the Messiah is here on earth reigning as king over the world. In the world to come, the name will be read the way it is written. Meaning today, whenever Jews see those letters, Yud He Vav He, Yehovah, or some people will say Yahweh, we'll talk about that hopefully, they read it as Adonai, which is, as I said, another title that appears 400 and something times. So they see those letters Yud He Vav He and they replace them with a completely different word. Which I'm trying to think if there's an example like that in the English language, where you see one word and you read a completely different word. Nothing's coming to mind.
Maybe a curse word.
Maybe. There you go.
But
isn't that interesting? So we have words that are so, let's say, bad that you can't say
so
them.
Profane.
Profane. And then there's words in many cultures that are so holy you can't say them. Right? So, and this was actually a practice in many of the ancient cultures in the Middle East, that there would be a god whose name was too holy to speak.
Really?
And the Canaanites, for example, worshipped a god who we know in the Old Testament as Baal. Or I think maybe some people say Baal, right?
That's how we like to say it.
But Baal just means Lord. And it's different than Adonai, which is what we use for our God. But that wasn't his name. What was his actual name? Well, we know his actual name from archaeology and study of ancient texts was Hadad, which means something like thunder, right? So he was a god of thunder. He was a storm god. But the Canaanites wouldn't call him Hadad. The Arameans did, who lived in Syria. But the Canaanites said, well, that name's too holy. We're just going to call him Lord.
Wow.
Right? So what an incredible parallel that we have. Now, did they copy us or did we copy them? Right? And I'll leave that open for as a question of history. But I think it was more a matter of this was a practice in many cultures, and Jews probably said something like, well, what, is the name of our God less holy than the name Hadad? Of course not. So we want to honor him by doing what we know other peoples do to honor their gods, by not saying his name. But that's not what he said to do. He said, this is my name forever. This is my mention from generation to generation.
Got it. So I brought a little whiteboard with me.
Okay.
And this is to help any of our visual listeners. If you're just listening on Spotify or something, tune into YouTube next time. Hopefully it'll be okay for them. But this is to kind of help people.
Okay.
And I want to share basically what I was taught, and then I want us to backtrack and say, okay, where did that come from, and what are the other perspectives essentially? So hopefully the mic's still catching this up or picking everything up. So thank you, Terry, for letting us use your whiteboard. And correct me if I'm wrong in any of this, but this is kind of, I think, the basic kind of Christian understanding.
Okay. And
what I was taught, and what I think a lot of Christians kind of understand to this day. So we have the Hebrew, Yod He Vav He. Good so far?
That's great.
If we were going to essentially transliterate this to English, our viewers might be familiar with YHWH. You might see it on some cool Christian hats that they sell now.
Okay.
And when most Christians see this today, at the time of this recording, they will say, oh, I know that. That's Yahweh.
right.
It's become very mainstream. I think the Passion Translation, which is a popular, newer translation, actually uses Yahweh,
Okay.
and they'll actually write it out.
Hmm.
But you'll notice you can't actually pronounce this in English. This would be, there's no vowels. And that is, if you're unfamiliar with Hebrew, there's the little dots that you see all over ancient Hebrew. Those are nikud, is that right?
Yep.
And those are essentially the vowels. You'll see a dot here, a patach or whatever, different things to give the vowels, because they're essentially saying we're going to add an A here, we're going to add an O up here. They're filling in the vowels. Does that make sense? Is that
Well, it makes
tracking?
sense to me. I don't know if it makes sense to the audience.
So
So the story behind this is that ancient Hebrew was written with consonants,
yeah,
and the vowels were, and this is a whole complicated subject, but basically the vowels were people say, well, ancient Hebrew didn't have vowels. Of course it did. Every spoken language had vowels.
yeah,
They just weren't written down.
yeah. You just knew
And
them.
you knew them. Well, there were people who were experts who memorized the entire Bible and were able to recite every single word precisely. For centuries they were doing this. And then sometime around the year 600, give or take, they started writing these vowels down.
Okay.
And they did that for a number of reasons. One is they were afraid, well, we're going to forget these. And another one was Hebrew was becoming less and less spoken, so it became more and more important as Jews were spreading out around the world.
Okay. So when they started adding the nikud so that we could all understand exactly how to pronounce these names, the story that I was told as a Bible student
Yeah.
is they didn't add the nikud to Yod He Vav He. They'd either leave the vowels essentially off, or they would add the vowels of Adonai to signal, don't say Yod He Vav He, you see these vowels of Adonai, that's because you're supposed to say Adonai. Kind of like what you referred to, the understanding that I was taught, and I think a lot of us are taught, is we didn't want to take the Lord's name in vain. That was the real kind of thrust behind it.
Yeah, that's interesting, because that's not the thrust in Jewish sources.
Really?
Meaning, so you've got the third commandment, or at least as Jews count it. The third commandment,
Yeah.
Lo tisa et Shem Yehovah Elohecha lashav, ki lo yinakeh et asher yisa et shmo lashav. Don't take the name of Yehovah your God in vain, for he will not make clean he who takes his name in vain. The ancient Jewish understanding of that is don't make a false oath in his name. Because the way they would make oaths is they would say, as Yehovah lives, and then they would say, as Yehovah lives, I will do X, Y, Z, or I testify to X, Y, Z. And if what you're saying is not true, you've taken his name in vain.
Yeah.
In vain means falsely.
Yeah.
And so it was a false oath. And that's the ancient Jewish understanding of that. Now, later Jews, much, much later, start to say, okay, it means to say the name without good reason. But the earlier sources don't have that at all. And I think it's ironic that that's the Christian understanding, that it's so this is okay. This is an outsider's perspective.
Yeah.
But I've encountered a lot of Christians who, when they hear somebody say the word, and I'm not knocking this, I'm just saying, understand from a Jewish perspective how alien this is. They think if you say something like, oh my, God, you're taking the name of the God in vain. From a Jewish perspective, that's not taking his, first of all, it's not his name.
Yeah, exactly.
That's a title.
Yeah.
But that's taking his name means to speak it falsely. And so so I think it's interesting. Some Christians become very legalistic.
Yeah. Totally.
And say, oh no, you can't say that, and you're a bad person if you say that.
Yeah.
And Jews hear that and they're like, we have no idea what you're talking about.
Yeah. Well, it reveals the lack of Jewish foundation that most of us Christians have. We've separated ourselves so aggressively from anything Jewish that when we find something that is in some ways inherently Jewish, which I think you could argue the whole Bible is inherently Jewish, but something that is maybe foreign to us, we have to kind of make up our own understanding. So all that to say, to kind of circle back, the way that I was taught, and I think a lot of Christians are taught, is the Jewish people didn't want to profane the name, whether that was tied to the third commandment or not. It was so holy, so they stopped saying it out of reverence. And it seems like in later Christian traditions, we developed Jehovah,
Mhm.
and that, from the Greek, they didn't have the y sound, they had the j sound.
Well, Greek doesn't. Well, so where the J came from is that so Martin Luther, he translates the Bible into German, and
Hmm.
then the English versions are based on this German, and in German the J was pronounced y, and actually in English it was pronounced y as well.
Mm.
Like if you look at the original 1611 King James version,
Yeah.
and this is interesting. When I say the original, people are like, "Oh, I went to Bible Hub and I got the King James." Well, that's not the one from 1611.
Okay.
I mean, and the differences aren't major, but there
Yeah,
are some
yeah, yeah.
differences. University of Pennsylvania has a high resolution scan online of the original 1611, and there you can see the name YHWH usually is translated as Lord in all caps,
Hmm.
but 7 times it's written, actually, I believe it's 6 times it's written Jehovah, and 1 time it's written Yehova with an I. Now, as far as I know, and I'm not an expert in English, I can barely speak the language, all 7 times they would have pronounced that something like Jehovah.
Mm.
And that was because they understood that first letter in Hebrew was a y.
Yeah.
Over time, the pronunciation of that letter changed, right? So the same text in English was then pronounced differently.
Yeah.
But in German to this day, if you were to write Jehovah, Jehovah, they would pronounce it Yehovah
Yeah. Well, and it's weird that we pronounce it, Israel
instead of Yisrael,
or
right?
Jisrael, because if
Yeah.
we're gonna take the y and make it a j.
Well, so this is interesting. There's a place in the Bible called Jezreel,
Yeah.
and there's another place in the Bible called Israel, and in Hebrew, one is Yisrael and the other is Yisrael,
Mm.
right? They're both Ye,
Yeah.
but one for some reason became a J and the other became an I.
Yeah. And then we added the s at the end of Jesus because all Greek names ended with s, right? Or like the
So
Augustus,
not all
Octavius,
names, but you have names
Julius.
like, well, this is an interesting example. We have the Jewish historian Josephus,
Yeah.
which is in Greek Josephus, but in Hebrew it's Yosef. So
Yeah.
where'd the us come from? Because that's a style of names in Greek ending in us. Maybe not all names, but many names
Yeah.
end in us.
Okay.
And so Yeshua, which was the Hebrew name of what became Jesus, in
Yeah.
Greek was, well, the Greeks didn't have a sh sound, so Yeshua, and they didn't have the ayin sound either. So
Yeah.
that became Yesu and then Jesus.
Yeah.
And for example, Joshua, the son of Nun,
Yeah.
in the ancient Greek translation of the Old Testament, what's called the Septuagint,
Yeah.
the Torah portion was translated around 250 BCE in Egypt when they were making the Library of Alexandria. That's a story anyway.
Mm.
It's more or less probably true. Um, and there they write Joshua's name, which in Hebrew is Yehoshua. They write it as Jesus,
Yeah.
right? So there's actually no difference between Jesus in Greek and Joshua in Greek.
Yeah.
And in Hebrew, actually, there's no difference, right? So
Yeah.
Joshua, the son of Nun, in the book of Nehemiah is called Yeshua, the son of Nun, which
Mm.
is the same name as
Yeah.
Jesus,
Yeah. Would have
right?
been
Just it's
deliverer,
a
right?
truncated form. Well, it means Yehova. This is interesting, important, related to the name,
Yeah.
right? Because some Christians will be like, "What do I need to know that name for? It's not important." Well, in John 17, Jesus said that he came to. One of the things he did is he manifested the name of his Father.
Yeah.
He says in 17:6, and then at the end in 26 of this prayer, he says he made known his Father's name. Well, what is his Father's name, and what does that mean? Well, the name Jesus, Yeshua, which is short for Yehoshua, means Yehovah Yoshia, Yehovah saves.
Mm.
And many Hebrew names are contractions of short sentences,
Yeah.
right? So my name, Nehemia, means Yehovah comforts.
Mm-hmm.
And the name Yehoshua, Joshua, or Jesus, Yeshua means Yehovah saves.
Yeah.
So, he talks about coming in his Father's name, and people are like, well, what does that mean? Or maybe they think they know what it means.
Yeah.
But if you don't know what the Father's name is,
Mm.
you're kind of missing, I feel like you're missing a piece of the puzzle.
Yeah. So when we're taught it was out of reverence
Mhm.
that the Jewish community would stop saying
That's
it.
correct. Meaning, let's say today, if you walked up to a rabbi and you said, I know the name of God is really Yahweh, well, many rabbis would have no idea what you're talking about.
Mm-hmm.
But if you said, some will, and they'll say, please don't say that name. We don't speak that name. Please don't speak it in my presence.
Yeah.
If you said, I know God's name is really Yehovah, most Jews will know what you're talking about
Mm.
because that's what they see written in their text,
Yeah.
even if they don't pronounce it. And it'll offend many Jews, absolutely. And I don't think you
Yeah.
should be offending people, right? I'm Jewish and I speak the name, and you can say it around me.
Yeah.
But I don't think we should be stuffing this down, people's throats who don't want to
Yeah,
hear it.
and we've had to talk to people because in the Christian culture
Hmm.
right now, Yahweh is a big deal,
Hmm.
and it's very much being clung to as this is the real name. We have
Hmm.
the name, and so more and more songs are being made that are Yahweh, and we have many
Hmm.
Jewish members at our church, and we try to help our Gentile friends like,
Hmm.
hey, that can be a little bit offensive. It can take them away from whatever they're experiencing in the service
Hmm.
and now make them focus on, oh my goodness, that was kind of jarring.
Hmm.
So my first question is, was that the original reason why, or were they told that they were not
Ooh,
allowed to
this
pronounce
is
it?
complicated because it gets into periods of history where we don't have all the answers. Here's what we know. There's a rabbi in the Talmud named Hanina ben Teradion. He's sometime around the year 135, 136. He's put to death by the Romans in a really brutal way. And the rabbis in the Talmud are trying to find out. They're discussing, they're debating. Everything in the Talmud is debates,
Yeah,
right? It's this dialogue that went on for about 5 centuries.
yeah.
And they're asking the question, why was he so brutally executed? And one of their explanations is, well, he used to speak the name the way it is written. What does that mean, the way it is? How else would you speak it?
Yeah.
Well, so the tradition by that time, by 135, 136 AD, was when you see the letters YHWH, you pronounce it Adonai,
Mhm.
Lord. You don't pronounce it the way it's written. And the tradition was in the world to come, when the Messiah is reigning here on earth, we'll speak it the way it's written. They didn't think that would be 2,000 years later and we'd still be waiting
Yeah.
for the Messiah to reign as king on earth, as a flesh and blood king over the world, with world peace, as Isaiah 2 describes.
Yeah.
They probably thought it would be a few years,
Yeah.
as a longer than they thought. Um, so what we learned from that is, wait a minute, there's Jews in the 2nd century AD who are speaking the name the way it is written, and these rabbis are saying, well, in this case, that led to him being executed in a very bad way,
Mm.
or a very brutal way. And so first of all, you can take away from that it was unusual in the 2nd century,
Yeah.
but there were people who were still doing it and remembered how to pronounce it. And then they go into all kinds of
Mm.
complicated explanations. I don't want to get into too much detail,
Yeah.
but basically, the name was being abused by Jews for magical purposes. And they say, well, he had to speak it because people use the name in magic. And how do you know what magic is if you've never heard the name?
Mm.
Right? If you mispronounce the name in magic, it doesn't have any effect. So this rabbi was teaching his students, if you hear somebody say it in this way, don't worry about it. That's not really the name. But if you hear him say it this way, they've sinned, and
Mm.
you should condemn that.
Yeah.
So so we learned that, wait a minute, okay, there's Jews who are abusing it in magic, and there's rabbis who are saying it, but only in a very limited context of
Yeah.
teaching people what magic sounds like so you don't do it.
Yeah.
And then we have a statement in the Mishnah where it says, all Jews have a portion in the world to come. And again, for the rabbis of the Mishnah, the world to come isn't heaven.
Yeah.
It's here on earth.
Yeah. It's a
I-
restored earth,
It's
essentially,
a
right?
restored, it's a new heaven and new earth in the resurrection, something like that in
Yeah.
rabbinical thought,
Yeah.
under the reign of the King Messiah, who's a flesh and blood king, descended from David.
Yep.
Um, and some people will have a portion in that world and some won't.
Mm-hmm.
And they say all Jews have a portion in the world to come, except the following. And then there's a list of exceptions.
Mm.
And one of those exceptions in the Mishnah is those who pronounce the name according to its letters. Meaning by the time that was written, probably in the 2nd century AD, that portion of the Mishnah, or certainly based on the names of the people, it's Rabbi Akiva's mentioned there, and
Okay.
people we know who lived around, who were killed by the Romans during the Hadrianic persecutions,
Yeah.
right? So around the year 135. So by that time, there is this idea you shouldn't speak the name the way it's written because you'll forfeit your portion in the world to come.
Mm.
But if you look at the context in which they're saying that, it's specifically in the context of magic.
Got it.
So this, right, later it's expanded to any speaking the name the way it is written. But the original context was, if someone is wounded, they would speak the verse, I am Yehova, your healer. And that's where they say one who speaks the name the way it is written has no portion in the world to come, in saying that as sort of like an incantation,
Mm.
right? Which is interesting because Christians heal in the name today, many Christians.
Yeah.
But from the perspective of the rabbis in the 2nd century, if you heal in the name YHWH, that it can be a prayer, no doubt,
Yeah.
but it can also be a magical incantation, and that's forbidden according to the Torah as they understood it.
Wow.
Yeah.
So at the foundation, it's
It's to respect the name
yeah,
from people who they perceived as abusing
but
it. And there are
it
other
wasn't
reasons.
necessarily outside persecution like the
There was
Romans.
also outside persecution,
Got
right?
it. Okay.
Meaning part of the Hadrianic persecutions was, look, I don't know if your audience knows who Hadrian. He was the most
Yeah.
evil Roman emperor who ever lived,
Mm-hmm.
and he wanted to stamp out Judaism. So here's what you need to understand: Jews in the Roman Empire had what you could call in Christian terms a special dispensation. And what did that mean? That meant everybody, to show you're a loyal citizen of the Roman Empire, needs to bring a sacrifice to the emperor.
Yeah.
Not for the emperor, to the emperor who is a god.
Mm.
And the Romans conquer, or they take over Judea. They finagle their way in 63 BCE under Pompey,
Yeah.
and then they gradually get more and more control over Israel. And they realize these people won't do it. And they're a good source of taxation. So we have two choices. We can kill them all, or we can make a special exemption for them.
Mm-hmm.
And the special exemption was, okay, you don't have to bring a sacrifice to the emperor. You can bring one for the emperor to your God.
Because the Jews would probably rather die than
They were dying.
yeah,
And
than
so,
worship a
so
false
they
god.
realized, okay, you guys just fought a war under the Maccabees against the Greeks. We see where this is going. The Romans, we just want the taxes and we want loyalty.
Yeah.
And if you can't bring a sacrifice to the emperor, you can bring one for the emperor. Okay.
Yeah.
But no other people were allowed to do that. And this is where Christians ended up being persecuted. When Christians were Jews, they were fine.
Yeah.
Right? They would say to them, okay, bring a sacrifice to the emperor. I can't. I'm a Jew. Okay, no problem.
Yeah.
Well, I believe in Jesus. I'm not a Jew. Okay, well, then you're going to die.
Yeah. So a
You-
Gentile that
A Gentile
that wants to
who
believe in
became a
Jesus.
Christian had two choices: bring a sacrifice to the emperor, or get executed.
Yeah, because there was no exemption.
There was no
For the
Jew
Gentile.
exemption for them.
Yeah.
So they're like, oh, this is not good. And
Yeah.
and you know that a lot of the persecutions were over that.
Yeah.
Not all of them. It became more complicated, right?
Yeah.
Being a Christian itself eventually was enough to get you persecuted.
Yeah.
But initially it was just really simple. If you're a Jew, you get an exemption. If you're not, you get executed or you bring the sacrifice. That's all you got to do. And the Gentile Christians, they kind of were like, no, we're a new category. Well, there's no new categories. We didn't agree to that, the Romans say.
Mm.
So Hadrian comes along and he says, look, this Jewish exemption, we got to do away with that. Enough.
Mm.
And why is it they can't just worship? They can worship their God. We have no problem with that. But they have to worship our gods as well. Right? And in the pagan mindset, that made perfect sense, right? There's lots of gods.
Yeah.
Right?
Add
The
one,
Romans
add another one.
in Rome had temples to, Egyptian gods and Persian gods, and right, we're honoring all the gods. We're very respectful.
Yeah.
Well, but from the Jewish and the Christian perspective, that's not respectful. That's sacrilegious.
Yeah.
So Hadrian comes along and institutes all these measures to get Jews to stop being different, basically.
Mm-hmm.
That he just wanted them to assimilate.
Yep.
And ultimately, he wanted them to bring sacrifices to him
Yeah.
and to his gods to show their loyalty. And one of the persecutions, we're told, is that the Romans forbade speaking the name.
Okay.
Right? So you have this convergence of two. There's an internal factor that people are abusing it in magic, or what Jews considered magic, and healing and things like that. And then the external factor is Roman persecution. And the rabbis said, well, we'll do it in the world to come. That'll be like 3 years from now, right? I mean, 50 years
They're like,
from
we
now.
got to be close.
Right?
Yeah.
We're definitely close.
Yeah.
Right? And there were good reasons they thought it was close.
Yeah.
Meaning from their perspective.
Totally.
And, well, it turned out that didn't happen the way that we thought.
And that happened in early Christianity as well. I think the New Testament authors were like, it's got to be like in a couple weeks,
Famously, Paul is struggling with this idea of the dead in Christ, right? Which people who have died before Jesus came back.
Yeah.
And people are like, what's going on? We thought it was going to be really soon.
Yeah.
Like, this isn't what we signed up for.
Yeah.
And he's, there's some profound teachings he has there, like, saying, hey guys, slow down. Might not be what you expected.
Yeah, totally.
So Jews were faced with a very similar, especially after the Bar Kokhba revolt, which is, right, so the temple's destroyed in 70 AD,
Mm-hmm.
but then the Bar Kokhba revolt is the Jews rise up and they anoint a Messiah, Simon Bar Kokhba.
Yeah.
What does that mean? They anoint him. They proclaim that he is the king of Israel.
Yeah. And
Well,
Akiva was big in that too, right?
Rabbi Akiva thought he proclaimed him the king of Israel.
Yeah.
And in what sense was he king of Israel? Well, he defeated the Roman army. That was the Jewish expectation,
Yeah.
right? It's like they say in Luke 24, they're walking on the road to Emmaus, and they're sad. And Jesus, who they don't know who he is,
Yeah.
says, "Why are you sad?" And he said, "We thought he was going to redeem Israel."
Yeah.
What did that mean to them? What that meant to the disciples of Jesus before the road to Emmaus
Yeah.
was that, well, he was going to defeat the Roman army and rule as a flesh and blood king.
Yeah.
And then a new thing is revealed to them in Luke 24, right?
Yeah.
But up until that, I mean, the other Jews still can, to this day, have that expectation.
Well, it's like what the disciples asked even the resurrected Jesus, which is, "Are you now going to establish your throne in Jerusalem?" Like,
what are we waiting for?
yeah, why?
Right? If you can do this, why are you not defeating the Romans?
It would have been mind-boggling for them that wouldn't be the next step.
It was definitely mind-boggling, right?
Yeah.
It basically says that in the New Testament,
Yeah.
that this is a big shock. Hey, the world's not going to go as you thought it would.
Yeah.
And the other Jews are still, to this day, this is the Jewish expectation.
Yeah.
What are we waiting for as Jews for the Messiah? We're waiting for world peace, ingathering of the exiles, and defeating the enemies, right? You can't get world peace until you defeat our enemies,
Yeah.
right? Evidently, from what I've seen on the news recently, our enemies have not been defeated and
Yes.
still want to wipe us out.
Yes.
There's this profound Jewish song that people recite during traditionally during the Passover Seder, and it goes something like, "In every generation they rose up to wipe us out." And Jews have been reciting this for centuries, for over 1,000 years, and it's mind-boggling. I mean, how can you not believe in God when you have these prophecies, when I read them in Deuteronomy, that there are these prophecies about being scattered amongst the nations and these persecutions, and then we see them not just in the black and white movies in history, we see them in our lifetimes.
Totally.
So, I mean, to me, this is the hand of God in history.
Yeah. I mean, I always tell people the greatest evidence that I have that the God of the Bible is the one true God is the continued persecution and redemption of the Jewish people all throughout history.
Mhm.
It's like that is the narrative of Scripture, is that he's going to keep his people, and the enemy's always going to try to attack them and rise up a Haman to exterminate them. And
so in Israel and Jerusalem, they have this museum. I'm sure you've been to it, Yad Vashem.
Yeah,
it's the National Holocaust Memorial. And there are these different displays. The last time I was there, at least, I don't know if they've changed it, there was this display where they have quotes from the Nazis. And one of the quotes is, "The chosen people are on the train to Auschwitz," something like that.
Wow.
And you're like, okay, I know he's being sarcastic.
Yeah.
But he on some level knows that there is good and there's evil. He thinks he's good.
Yeah.
Right? Those are on the side who are on the side of, I'll use Christian terms, those who are on the side of Satan think they're good.
Mm-hmm.
But they understand there's another side.
Yeah.
And they're fighting against that other side.
Yeah.
And to imagine, I mean, this literally happens, that a Nazi would send a communique that the chosen people are on the trains, being sent to their deaths.
Yeah.
And to use that terminology, even if it's in a sarcastic way, I mean, it reminds me of, when the high priest says, the death of one man will be bring redemption for the people, or something like that. Not realizing what he said, but on some level, maybe realizing what he said. Yeah.
Yeah. Whether it was subconscious, whether it was the Holy Spirit, or whether he knew.
I mean, it's true. What a profound reality we live in. And this isn't just history, it's happening today.
Yeah.
So back to the name. So there was external persecution and internal persecution.
Yeah.
And it was never intended to be forever. Meaning within the rabbinical sources themselves, when they say it's forbidden to speak the name, and if you do, you lose your portion in the world to come, they also say, well, that's only a temporary measure until the world to come, which hopefully will be soon. And even today I can say, hopefully will be soon. Here on earth, that is. And I believe Christians have a similar idea of the second coming and the millennial kingdom, right? So, what is that name in the world to come?
Yeah.
So, so the Christian, or let's go, not necessarily Christian, but the attitude of Christian Hebraists, who are these scholars who are like, okay, we've thrown off the yoke of the Catholic Church, right? This is how it happened. It was part of the Protestant Reformation, was people said, well, we should actually read the Bible. Well, how do we read the Bible? We don't know Latin. Okay, let's translate it. All right, what do we translate it from? And Martin Luther famously, there's this great quote from Martin Luther. I quoted it in one of my books. And he says that if I were younger, I would learn Hebrew. It's the best language of all. And he has this beautiful.
Ironic.
What's that?
It's
It's ironic because
what he did later.
he started out as a lover of Jews.
Totally.
And then about 10 years later, he wrote a book called The Jews and Their Lies, in which he lays out a plan which becomes the Holocaust.
Yeah.
But early on, he loved the Jews.
Yeah, his other book, the one he wrote early on, I think was called Jesus Born a Jew. And it was all about the Jewishness of Jesus.
So he underwent a transformation for whatever reason. But at one point in his life, he said, if I were younger, I would want to learn Hebrew. It's the best language of all.
Wow.
And he has this beautiful parable. He says the Hebrew is the source, the spring. And I hope I'm getting this right. I think he says the Greek is the river that flows from the spring, and Latin is a downstream puddle.
Wow.
Right. And that makes you wonder, okay, then what's, German for him and
English for us.
English for us, right?
Yeah.
So the Protestant reformers understood they needed to get back to the sources, and they started learning Hebrew. Not Martin Luther per se.
Yeah.
He knew a little bit of Hebrew.
Yeah.
But there were people even in his time who started to study Hebrew systematically. And at first they're learning from Jews, but eventually they developed what becomes the modern academic study over centuries of the Hebrew language. And when I went to the Hebrew University of Jerusalem, we studied the writings of a Christian Hebraist, Wilhelm Gesenius, who is one of the great, really, scholars, one of the people who really established Hebrew linguistics, biblical Hebrew linguistics, as a study.
Okay.
And so for centuries, the Christians are trying to figure out what are the rules of Hebrew, and how do we pronounce that name? How do we pronounce the name YHWH? And they debate this for centuries. And there's this great quote in the, I believe it's in the 1600s. It's a Christian in England, and he said the pronunciation of that name is the anvil upon which everybody beats their hammer. Right? Everybody's got an opinion, and we just don't know. Now, why don't we know? We don't know because the Jews stopped pronouncing it, and the Jews themselves don't know how to pronounce it. Right? This is their and they quote in particular Moses Maimonides, who was a rabbi in the 12th century. He died in 1204 in Egypt, right? So the beginning of the 13th century, and he makes this statement that, well, how do we pronounce that name? That name is basically, he says something to the effect of, it's a secret, and you don't know what the vowels are, because the vowels of the name are not the vowels of that name, to the vowels of Adonai, right? That's basically the gist of what he says.
Yeah.
And if those are the vowels, and there is a precedent for that we can go into if you want, that there are certain words, you can call them euphemisms, right? What's a euphemism? It's, instead of saying a bad word, I say a good word, right? I'll say, oh my goodness, instead of oh my God, right?
Yeah.
God's not a bad word.
Or Adam knew his wife. Wink, wink, right? Isn't that a
So
euphemism?
there's an example in biblical Hebrew of a euphemism.
Yeah.
Right? That's a great example. Adam knew his wife, right?
Yeah.
It's new in an intimate sense, but it means they had relations.
Yeah.
Even relations.
That's a
is
euphemism.
Exactly,
They had sex.
Right?
Yes.
Exactly. I explained one euphemism with another euphemism.
Yeah.
So there are euphemisms in the Hebrew Bible, meaning there are words written in the Hebrew text. If you take a Torah scroll out of the ark in the synagogue and you scroll to certain verses, you'll find there's a word that's written one way, but when they read it a different way.
Really?
Yeah.
Other than, I
100%.
didn't know that.
No, not Adonai. There's other words. I can
Wow.
tell you what they are. They're not bad words. One of them is a bad word, which I can't say probably on this program. And instead of that word, it says the word lay, to lay with.
Okay.
Right? And that word, the actual explicit word, is there in the Hebrew text. But nobody reads it that way for obvious reasons.
Yeah.
But and here's the point: when they did write down the vowels in the 600s, they wrote the vowels of the way the word is read, not the way it's written.
Okay.
So, in other words, you'll see a word with impossible vowels, and some of them aren't euphemism; they're like linguistic, like variants, right?
Yeah.
So there's a word for we in Hebrew, which is anu,
Mm-hmm.
and that's kind of like a common word for it. And then there's the fancy word, which is anachnu.
Yeah.
And anachnu has more vowels than anu. And when you see that word anu in the book of Jeremiah, it only appears once in the entire Hebrew Bible. It has the vowels of the fancy word. But those vowels are impossible. It has 5 vowels for a 2-syllable word. So what's going on there, right?
Yeah.
So they put the vowels of the way the word was read, not the way it was written.
Mm.
And Gesenius and the people before him really come along. The first one that we know about for sure is in, or one of the first is 1518. There's a man named Galatinus. He's actually a Catholic. He's the confessor of the Pope. And he says, well, how do we pronounce this name? Right? If it has the vowels of Adonai, how do we pronounce it? And he says, well, if you pronounce the vowels the way that it's written, it would be Yehovah. But the Jews say those are the vowels of Adonai. And as far as we know, he's the first one first Christian
Yeah.
to explicitly say that if you take the vowels the way they're written in the Hebrew text, the name is pronounced Yehovah.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the way it's presented, even by scholars today, is, well, and I apologize for the term, I coined it. I call it the stupid Christian hypothesis. The stupid Christian hypothesis is Peter Galatinus was so stupid, he thought those were the vowels of the name when he said it would be pronounced Yehovah. He didn't know the Jews read that as Adonai.
Yeah.
But all you have to do is translate the Latin in that passage, and he explicitly says the Jews read that as Adonai. So he wasn't stupid. He knew the Jews pronounce it as Adonai.
Yeah.
And he wasn't even saying pronounce it as Yehovah. He was saying if you take the vowels the way they're recorded, it would be Yehovah.
Yeah.
So,
Because I was
yeah.
taught the vowels of Adonai
Mhm.
are put over YHWH just to signal the Jewish reader that you should say Adonai.
So it's so the way it's understood, and there's some truth in that, right? But it's a bit more complicated, right?
It always
Meaning there's
is.
definitely a signal in the text that in some instances you read the name Yud-He-Vav-He. In most instances of 6,827, that's based on the Aleppo Codex or reconstruction of the Aleppo Codex. 6,828 in the Leningrad Codex, another important manuscript. So there's actually a slight difference there.
Okay.
But of those, around 430 or so times, when you see, or 300 times, excuse me, when you see Yud He Vav He, you don't actually read it as Adonai, you read it as Elohim, which is the word for God.
Do they put the vowels of
So
Elohim?
they do. Yes.
Interesting.
And the third letter has an E instead of an A, because
Mm.
Elohim is an E.
Yeah.
So that's signaling to the reader, read these 300 or so instances as Elohim and read these other instances as Adonai, right?
Okay.
No one disputes that there's a signaling to the reader. Here's where things get complicated. If you look at the actual vowels of Adonai, they are not the vowels of the name Yud-He-Vav-He in the manuscripts.
Interesting.
So the vowels of Adonai would be A-O-A.
Hmm.
And the vowels in the name Yud-He-Vav-He are Yehova, but in some manuscripts it's Yehovah. But in when I can't say no manuscripts, because I found a few manuscripts where it does have the actual vowels of Adonai, and that's what scholars call the exception that teaches the rule, right? So if the scribes wanted to write the vowels of Adonai, they knew how to do it. How do I know that? Because sometimes they did.
Yeah.
Right? In a handful of manuscripts they did.
Okay.
But in most manuscripts there's different vowels. And if you look at what Jewish rabbis said about this, so there's this great debate that takes place in 1608 between these two rabbis.
Okay.
And this is something I discovered. I discovered it because I was told no Jew ever said they knew how to pronounce the name. And
It was told that?
I was told that.
Oh, you were told that. Okay.
I thought that. I taught that.
Yeah.
The Jews didn't know how to pronounce. Well, here's what I taught. That no Jewish rabbi ever revealed how to pronounce the name. We only know it from the manuscripts of the Bible. I taught that.
Okay.
The rabbis did know, and how do I know they knew? Because in the Talmud, when it says you're not allowed to speak the name, it also says that rabbis would teach the name to their disciples once every 7 years.
So they knew it, but they were not saying it.
They were saying it in secret once every 7 years as part of some ceremony of transmitting the name so the knowledge wouldn't be lost.
Yeah.
And Maimonides doesn't actually say no one knows how to pronounce the name. This passage that the Christian Hebraists are quoting from Maimonides just says most people don't know how to pronounce the name. He doesn't say no one knows.
Got it.
Right? Well, did he know? I don't know if he knew or not.
Yeah.
He probably didn't know. But there were people who did know. And there are these rabbis who I found, I have a teaching called 10 Rabbis Speak on the Name, and it turns out there's more than 10. But there's a debate in 1608 between these two rabbis. They're sending letters to each other and debating a certain point. They're actually debating how to pronounce the word Adonai, which means Lord,
Yeah.
right? Because even that is debated.
Interesting.
But what they agree on is those vowels in YHWH are the vowels of the name itself. And the one
Right.
rabbi says, well, those vowels are for the world to come. When the Messiah reigns here on earth as a flesh and blood king, Jews will pronounce that name, Yehovah. Right? He names the vowels, Shvach Olam Kamat, those are the names of the vowels.
Yeah.
And the other rabbi says, no, those vowels are now because they're the same vowels as Adonai, which he believed was supposed to be pronounced Edonai, right? But so, in other words, the other rabbi was saying, those are the vowels both of that name, YHWH, and the title, right? When you say Adonai, you're wrong. That's not how to pronounce it, or at least in certain instances, let's say. So, but they're agreeing that the vowels of the name YHWH are Yehovah, which is really interesting because it's a fact. And when I do the teaching, I tell the audience, say fact, say common knowledge, that the vowels of the name YHWH are the vowels of Adonai. But in fact, those are not the vowels, number one. And number two, there are Jewish rabbis who knew and believed, you could say they were wrong. So here's a fact, right?
Yeah.
They believed that those vowels, Yehovah, were the actual vowels of that name. Now, where do we get Yahweh? Ooh, that's interesting. So there is a Christian church father named Theodoret of Cyrus, and he is in the 5th century AD.
Okay.
And he says the Jews pronounce the Tetragrammaton Ayah, and the Samaritans pronounce it Yahweh. And scholars, Christian Hebraists, saw this, and they said, okay, the Jews didn't know how to pronounce it, and they didn't pronounce it, right? Because what's Ayah? There's no A in the name YHWH.
Yeah.
Right? So that's probably Ehyeh, I will be or I am. But the Samaritans, well, they didn't have a prohibition to speak the name, so they must have been pronouncing it Yahweh. And what is Yahweh in Hebrew? Yahweh, well, in ancient Hebrew, it's believed it wouldn't have been Yahweh, it would have been Yahweh. Right? The H would be pronounced Yahweh.
Yeah.
And that's, so in other words, that's a reconstruction from a Christian church father in the 5th century, quoting a Samaritan, and then reconstructing back into actual Hebrew what a Samaritan would have meant, right? So there's a lot of steps here.
Yeah,
right?
we jumped through a lot of hoops.
Right. One of the problems is the Samaritans stopped speaking the name way before the Jews.
Interesting.
Yeah, so the Samaritans actually don't speak the name. They call God Shema, which is Aramaic for the name. So when they read in the 10 Commandments, where God says, Anochi Yehovah Elohecha shehotziticha me'eretz Mitzrayim, I am Yehovah, your God, who brought you out of the land of Egypt, they read the name Yud-He-Vav-He. And by the way, they don't pronounce the letters Yud-He-Vav-He, because the Vav they pronounce as a B, which is interesting. That shows they didn't pronounce it as a W, they pronounced it as a V.
Yeah.
But when they read the letters Yud-He-Vav-He, the Samaritans pronounce that as Shema, which is a replacement for the name, meaning in Aramaic, the name.
It's kind of like Hashem.
It's exactly Hashem, but Hashem's Hebrew, Shema is Aramaic.
Got it.
And there's evidence that, or it's guaranteed that by the 5th century, when Theodoret says this, they were not speaking the name. So in other words, he would have had to have some tradition going back, I don't know, hundreds of years, probably 5 or 6 centuries. In other words, he didn't hear it from the Samaritan high priest.
Yeah.
If he's reporting a genuine tradition, he heard it from someone who 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 heard it, and add that several more times from someone who heard it from the Samaritan.
So it's a shaky foundation to say
it's very
Yahweh.
shaky.
And you know, we talked about this kind of jokingly earlier. A lot of Christians will today say Yahweh is the very breath of God. When you breathe, you say Yahweh, and so you're saying the name of God every time you breathe. Where'd that come from?
I think some guy on the internet made that up. I don't know who made that up.
You've heard it. Have you heard?
I've heard
Christians
it. I
say
heard that like many years ago.
Yeah.
And the way it was presented was, well, there are certain Native American chants where they are saying something that sounds like to them like Yahweh, and it's part of a breathing process. And now I don't know if that is. I don't know enough about Native American. I was told this by a Native American, by the way.
Got it.
So I don't know if that is the source of it or not.
Yeah.
And his point was,
but that's not that's not an ancient Jewish source.
Not that I'm aware of. No. The source I'm aware of is Jews are saying, and there are actually 3 different pronunciation in Jewish sources. But the most common, widespread one And it's interesting because when they're discussing it, they're saying this is a secret, don't tell anybody, is that it's Yehovah.
So if it is Yehovah and they didn't want to say it because it was looked at as, whether it was the magic or whether it was the persecutions and then later developed into just a reverence.
Respect and honor, yeah.
Then why would you put the vowels there to say it?
So that's interesting. So in the early manuscripts, they leave out one of the vowels.
Okay.
And you might say, oh, no, well, maybe it just has 2 vowels. Well, it can't. And I could go into the rules of biblical Hebrew. But basically, based on the rules of biblical Hebrew, there's a vowel missing.
That was their insurance of not saying it.
That was the way to probably prevent people from accidentally pronouncing it. Okay. Even if you see those vowels, you won't pronounce it because there's a vowel left out.
Yeah.
And one of the really cool things is sometimes they did put in the full vowel. So, but I feel like that's a whole separate discussion to do justice to that. I don't want anybody to take away from this that, oh, it's evil to say Yahweh. Nehemia is rebuking us and judging us, and we shouldn't say Yahweh. I say to people, work it out for yourself in fear and trembling with prayer and study before the Creator of the universe. Yeah. And we have this beautiful verse in Psalm 44. In the Hebrew, it's verses 20 to 21. I want to say in the, or maybe it's 19 to 20. Right, in the King James and the Hebrew, it's slightly different verses. But it's there around verses 20, 21, 22, and the different versions. And it's a beautiful passage. It says, it talks about the Jews being sent into exile. They're scattered among the nations. And it says, if we raise our hands to a foreign God, raise our hands and call upon the name of a foreign God, you will search it out in our hearts. And what it's saying is, look, in exile in Babylon, where we were sent into the Babylonian exile, there's people who 2-3 generations in, they don't even remember the name of God. And they're calling on, this is like Daniel, right? He has all these different gods he's told to worship, and his 3 companions. And so a few generations in, they're calling on Marduk, and they're calling on Bel, and these different Babylonian deities. But in their hearts, they mean Yehovah. And God is that merciful, we're told there, that he can look in our hearts. And that's, I think that's, from a Jewish perspective, that's grace. Because I don't deserve it. I'm calling on the wrong name. Yeah. And he still can have mercy on me. Yeah, knowing so I don't think we should be more judgmental than God. At the same time, look, I'm obsessed with truth. I have autism. And part of that is an obsession with biblical truth, what I understand is biblical truth. Yeah. And so I just want to know what the truth is, the historical and biblical truth. Yeah. And the historical and biblical truth, the best information I have currently is that it's Yehovah. Could it be Yahweh? Sure, anything's possible. It could be, and I say jokingly to people, it could be Yuhu-Vuhu. But it's actually not a joke. It really could be Yuhu-Vuhu. And I have actually found, this is not a joke, I found more Hebrew Jewish manuscripts with Yuhu-Vuhu than I have with Yahweh. And that's not a joke. Now, those are Kabbalistic texts where they're saying these are meditations, not how you should pronounce it. Yeah. But I don't find any Kabbalistic meditations with Yahweh. Yeah. That didn't even come into their minds, so which is interesting. So at least I haven't found those. Maybe they're out there. Yeah. Or maybe there's one I did see at Cambridge University, but that's one out of, now that I think about it. There might be one with Yahweh. But Yuhu-Vuhu is actually quite common, believe it or not. I don't think it was Yuhu-Vuhu, because that doesn't really fit with other well, here's the most important part to me. One of the most important parts. What does the name actually mean? Yep. Leave aside how it's pronounced. Yeah. How it's pronounced informs what it means and vice versa. So what it means in Jewish sources is Hayah, he was, Hoveh, he is, and Yehyeh, he will be. And there's this, I recently did a teaching on this. There is an ancient Jewish translation to Aramaic where they paraphrase it. And for he will be, they explain as in the future he will come. Right? So he was, he is, and he will come. Does that sound familiar from anywhere?
Revelation.
That's absolutely Revelation. Yeah. And specifically, it's a number of verses in Revelation. And one of the passages, it's the same vision that Isaiah saw in chapter 6, where he sees the angels saying, Kadosh, 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 holy, 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 in Greek, Hagios, Hagios, Hagios. Yeah. And then in Hebrew, it's Yehovah Tzevaot, Yehovah of hosts. Yeah. And that's the context in which it says something like the Lord Almighty, who was, is, and is to come. Yeah. Right? So, in other words, and I'm not the first one to recognize this, there are Christian scholars who have realized, wait, that's HaYahoveh Hieh. Yeah. That's the meaning of the name Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh, Yehovah. And Yehovah, that pronunciation was understood by Jews as, and here some scholars will say, well, the Jews didn't know. Okay, so you think the Jews didn't know what they were talking about. But the way it was understood by Jews is YHWH, yeah, he was, is, and is to come, was then the explanation of the pronunciation Jehovah. Right? If you take the form he was and he is to come in Hebrew and you combine them, you take part of each of those words, you get Yehova.
And is the proper understanding of what we would typically translate as I am?
So
better?
I am, it's complicated, and people have literally written PhD dissertations on the Hebrew verbal system, so we're not going to solve that here.
Yeah.
But basically, I am would be understood by most Jews today as I will be, but it's actually a bit more complicated. It really means I am now and continue to be into the future.
Yeah.
Right?
So
the verbal system is complicated in biblical Hebrew.
So it's not a far stretch to say the I am statement at the burning bush could be translated
100%.
I am who.
There's
I
not
am
a
who
question that when the Hebrew it says Ehiyah, I will be, in the ancient Greek Septuagint. So here's the problem: the Greeks didn't have the same verbal system as Hebrew.
Yeah.
So when the Jews translated Exodus 3:14 Ehiyah asher ehiyah into Greek, they translated Ehiyah as ego eimi, I am, which is what Jesus says. There's not a question. When Jesus says ego eimi, I am, he's alluding to, I think everyone accepts that.
Yeah.
He's alluding to Exodus 3:14.
You're talking about when he says before Abraham was.
I am.
I am.
Ehiyah, I will be, right? So in other words, that's what it is in Greek, I am. But in Hebrew, it's a bit more nuanced. It's I am now and continue to be into the future. It's a repetitive action.
Yeah. And so it is very similar to I am.
It's
the one who is, the one who was, the one who is to come.
It's the Greek equivalent of
Yeah.
I am. So that's the context. Exodus 3:14, God says, I am, or I will be, and I continue to be into the future. And then the very next verse, he says, my eternal name is YHWH, Yehova.
Yeah.
And I don't think it's, let's say, it was not lost on the authors of the New Testament and the early Christians that the name Jesus means Yehovah, Yoshia, he that was, is, and is to come, saves, right? That's the meaning of the name Jesus back into Hebrew. It's the name of the Father, he will save.
Got it. That's so good. So as we now transition to the New Testament, I have a few New Testament questions regarding the name. But first, when the Hebrew scholars, or I guess maybe Greek scholars, but I think they were Jewish, translated the Old Testament from Hebrew to Greek, which we would call the Septuagint. Did they ever, I think the Greek word is Kyrios, which is Lord.
Yeah. Kyrios or Kurios, depending on your Greek dialect.
Okay. Did they ever put Yod He Vav He? Did they ever
that's
put,
interesting.
or was it always Kyrios?
So it was definitely not, well, it's hard to say anything definitely.
Yeah.
So the original Septuagint was translated around 250 BCE. We don't have a copy from 250 BCE. We have a copy from around 300 AD, so about 550 years later.
Because we would say that Jesus would have been familiar with the Septuagint, and the first century Jews would have been maybe familiar.
I would imagine when he read from Isaiah from the scroll in Capernaum,
he's reading Hebrew.
In Nazareth, he was reading from the Hebrew.
Totally, but not saying that they were speaking Greek, because I believe that Jesus was speaking Hebrew and would have been a
certainly
prominent
when he was reading
language.
from the scroll. There's no
Totally.
debate that he was.
But would there have been
Hebrew.
an understanding of the Septuagint?
So here's what we know today after about 70, 80 years of the Dead Sea Scrolls being discovered.
Yeah.
So we know today, or what the evidence we have is all of our earlier copies, meaning anything before the let's say late 2nd century AD of the Septuagint, has one of two things. It has either Yud He Vav He written in Hebrew letters.
So it's Greek and then random Hebrew 4 letters.
Exactly, and I could show you a picture of it. You can throw it up on the screen. I can send it to you.
Love that.
And anybody not knowing a letter of Greek will say that's different.
Yeah, they just randomly changed.
All of a sudden,
the code changed.
Scribe wrote a different word, maybe a different scribe in some cases. Meaning maybe they left blank spaces and they were filled in some cases. But so there's a different script all of a sudden. They're writing Greek, and when they get to the name Yud He Vav He, they write the letters Yud He Vav He. And Origen, who is a church father who worked more on the Septuagint probably than anybody, he even probably did some revisions of the Septuagint, he says the most accurate manuscripts have the name written in ancient letters. right? When they get to that name in the Greek text, they wrote YHWH. And then we have one Dead Sea Scroll where instead of YHWH, they write it with the Greek pronunciation, which is Yao. And Yao is almost certainly an abbreviated form of YHWH.
In Greek.
In Greek.
Wow.
They're writing Yao. And then there's some Aramaic evidence to point to that as well. That
So
probably we don't have time to get into.
these manuscripts where it's written in Greek and then there's a Hebrew Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh, how late are those documents?
How late? So that's an interesting question. I mean, we have them, some of them are surprisingly late, but we also have early ones.
Okay.
Meaning we have ones that are from the Second Temple period. And then we also have stuff that might be as late as the 5th or 6th century, which is like, wait, you're still doing that?
Yeah, they're still continuing
after the Christian, and so those are almost certainly Jewish copies of the Septuagint.
Yeah.
I mean, the Christians had already swapped it out with Kyrios, and some Jews seem to be continuing to write Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh in Paleo-Hebrew letters.
Yeah.
And there's this really interesting statement by one of the church fathers who says that it's so bad when the Christians see Yod-Heh-Vav, and he's a Christian, right? He's saying when Christian scribes see Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh in the Paleo-Hebrew, in these ancient Hebrew characters, they don't know how to copy them, so they replace the Hebrew letters Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh with the Greek letters Pi-Yota, which is pronounced Pipi. And they literally have the word Pipi in there, right? They have a perfectly great Greek text in the Old Testament, and they get to the letters Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh, and they're like, I don't know how to write those weird Hebrew letters.
Yeah.
And the Hey kind of looks like a Pi, and the Yud and the Vav kind of look like a Yota, so Pi-Yota. And so eventually they swap it out with Kyrios. And so what some scholars would say is what's called the Old Greek. The Old Greek is not the one we have today of the Septuagint, but let's say the earlier version of the Septuagint seems to have had the name Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh written in Paleo-Hebrew characters, or some sort of Hebrew characters, or some pronunciation such as Ya'o found in one of the Dead Sea Scrolls, 4Q120.
Wow. So when the New Testament authors sit down and they're writing in Greek and maybe making allusions to a Septuagint.
Well, here's the really good one. When Peter in Acts 2 is quoting from Joel, and it says, all those who call upon the name of the Lord will be saved. So 2 questions. What did he say in Jerusalem on Pentecost? Did he say Adonai? Did he say Kyrios? Did he say Jehovah? Did he say Yahweh? And then what was written down? Because maybe he said Adonai, but then they wrote it down as Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh because Jews pronounced it as Adonai, right? So these are questions we don't have the answer to, and I say work it out for yourself in fear and trembling when prayer and
But is it written as Kyrios?
It's written today as Kyrios, absolutely, in the earliest manuscripts.
And I know you do a lot of work with the ancient Hebrew New Testament. You know, there's some fragments of Revelation. There's the book of Matthew, the Hebrew Matthew. Is that all Kyrios?
I want to be careful in calling it the ancient Hebrew. Let's call it Hebrew witnesses to versions of the New Testament. Maybe they're translations from Greek or Latin in some cases. Many of those have some representation of the name in Hebrew. Some actually have the letters Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh.
Really?
Although those almost certainly came from Christian scribes. Right? Meaning it could be a Christian translating from Latin or Greek and saying, well, I mean, I know obviously this would be Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh in Hebrew. And in other instances, it will have like the letter Hey, which is how rabbis would represent the name Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh outside the Old Testament, which is like Hashem, right, representing the name. So why didn't they just write Lord? So it could just be that they're like, okay, let's restore what originally was there. Or in some cases, and this is very controversial, maybe they're copying from some earlier source that preserves something in Hebrew.
Because when I look at some of the writings in the New Testament, for example, a big one that we quote all the time, Romans 10:9, which is kind of like the Christian playbook of how do you get saved. It is believe in your heart that Jesus is Lord. And I'm like, wait.
So did he say
Kyrios?
That Jesus is
Adonai?
But in Hebrew, it's even more complex because it could be one of 3 things: that Jesus is Yehova, that Jesus is Adonai, or that Jesus is Adoni.
My Lord.
Right. Well, both Adonai and Adoni means my Lord. One is only used of God, and one would be used of humans or an angel. So which one did they say? And we don't know, right? That's
Yeah.
a theological position that I'll leave for Christians to argue about and debate.
Yeah.
But the last word I want to say here, which is I think the most important thing, please don't take away from this that I've learned this new thing, it's Yehovah, and I'm going to beat my friends over the head with
Yeah.
it. Please don't do that. Love if you don't speak the name Yehovah in love and for unity and to find common ground, whether you're dealing with a Jew or a Christian, then that is a desecration of the name in my view.
Yeah. Well, I'd love to end because it's one of the scriptures that we quote a lot, especially in the Messianic world. It's quoted a lot, which is, Yeshua saying to Jerusalem, "You will not see me again until you cry out, Baruch haba b'shem Adonai."
And that's a quote from Psalms, which
Exactly.
is Baruch haba b'shem Yehovah.
Yeah.
Blessed is he who comes in the name of Yehovah. And that's interesting, by the way. We talked earlier about the greeting of ancient Israel.
Yeah.
That was a greeting, right? In other words, the original context in Psalms is the Levites are standing at the entrance of the temple, and they say, "Blessed is he who comes in the name of Yehovah," meaning you're blessed in the name of Yehovah. And Jesus, Yeshua, takes that and reads a prophetic messianic Christological reading into it, saying, wait, there's a deeper meaning you guys might have missed, right? You had eyes, but you didn't see it.
Yeah.
And the deeper meaning is not just you're being greeted like you do every day in the name of Yehovah, but there's one who is coming it's not just the blessing in the name of Yehovah, there's one who's coming in the name of Yehovah.
Yeah.
Which, that's a pretty neat trick if you never use the name or, I don't know.
Yeah, man, that's crazy. Well, as we all go back to the scriptures and we read scriptures like, "In the name of the Lord we shall be saved," or the name of the Lord is a strong tower, is this important for us to know if we're going to know God intimately? Is this important to know if there's going to be power in our prayers? Or is this a fun
So I don't want it
fact?
to be like a magical incantation,
Yeah,
but it's also not a
clearly.
fun fact. There's this beautiful scene where Melchizedek comes and he blesses Abraham, and he blesses him by the Most High God, creator of heaven and earth. And this is in the presence of the king of Sodom. And Abraham hears this, and he must have been thinking, I know who Melchizedek is talking about, but there's also a Canaanite deity called the Most High God, creator of heaven and earth. And we're among Canaanites.
Yeah.
And so he responds to Melchizedek, and he adds the name Yehovah. He says, Yehovah, the Most High God, creator of heaven and earth.
Wow.
And his reason for doing that, it seems in the context there is, I know who you're talking about, you know who I'm talking about, but that guy over there, the king of Sodom, he don't know who we're talking about. So to remove the ambiguity, it's important that we be very specific and say, but who is the Most High God, creator of heaven and earth?
Yeah, man, that's good.
Imagine if you were in a Christian denomination where they said you cannot say the name Jesus. It's offensive to some Christians, so we're just going to call him God, or we're just going to call him the Son. Well, there could be a lot of confusion if you're in India where they have a God, and they have gods who are son of God.
Yeah.
And they might say, oh, okay, oh, you mean that, so-and-so, that's the son of God.
Yeah.
Well, no, we better be more specific and clarify who we mean in that case.
Well, thank you for doing all of the research that allows us to have this conversation, the research that 99% of people would never do because it is just years and years of trudging and getting manuscripts. Like, you're doing the hard work, you're plowing so that we can just come and have this awesome conversation and learn so much. And I know you're continuing to do this kind of work. So I just want to, leave by one saying thank you. Thank you for the deep dives that you're doing in manuscripts, continuing to find these Torah pearls, these Hebrew gospel pearls, all these things that you've dedicated your life to. How can people follow you, stay up to date with what's going on?
So I'm Nehemiah, and I built the wall. So nehemiahswall.com, that's the way to remember that. Nehemiah was the guy in the Bible who built the wall, and that's my website, nehemiahswall.com.
That's great. Well, thank you for coming again and sharing all this
Thanks for
wisdom
having
and
me.
knowledge with us. That's all we have for today. Join us next time on the Covenant Conflict Podcast. We will see you soon.